Welcome back to the channel, guys. Have you ever heard anyone use the term crop factor when talking about a lens going on a camera? If so, we're going to get into details on that. Okay, so if you've ever been in conversation and you've got, say, a friend that's got a full frame camera and a 50mm lens, when they go to put that 50mm lens on a full frame, like this is the Canon 6D, it's a full frame, they put the 50 on the full frame, you get a 50mm view. That's not the sensor right there, that's the mirror, but that's the size of the sensor. But if you take that same 50mm lens and put it on a Canon crop sensor or an APS-c camera, or you probably heard the term, you can see where that is a little bit smaller. That sensor's a little bit smaller, and again, that's just the mirror, that's not the sensor. If you take that same 50mm lens and put it on the Canon crop sensor, it's going to become an 80mm lens. The reason that is the size of the sensor in the camera. Full frame is basically the equivalent to what 35mm was back in the days in the 80s and 90s. And 35mm was the most dominant film, other than like wedding professionals that might have used medium format. And there were some small oddball sizes like 110, but 35mm was pretty much the choice of film for back in the day. So when digital came along, the sensor size on it is made to be about 35mm. That's where the term comes from. Now there's also a micro four thirds camera. If you put a 50mm on a micro four thirds camera, it'll turn that into a 100mm lens. It'll turn it into a 100mm view instead of a 50. Now there are advantages and disadvantages to this. If you're doing wildlife or you're shooting birds, say at a distance, if you have a full frame camera, you're not going to get any added bonus. Whatever you put on a full frame camera, if you put a 200mm on here, you're going to get a 200mm. But if you take a 200mm lens and put it on a Canon crop sensor, which is a 1.6 factor, that 200mm becomes a 320mm lens. So you just gained the 120mm zoom by using the same lens, just using a smaller sensor. And if you take a 200mm and put it on a micro four thirds, suddenly you're at 400mm. And it's a lot cheaper to buy a 200mm f4 lens than it is a 400mm f4 lens. But then there are also trade-offs with the sensor sizes. Your full frame cameras, the one that give you, if it's a 50mm, it's going to be 50mm. Whatever the lens is, it is going to be that on a full frame sensor. The upside to using like an APS-c to getting that 1.6 factor is you can get lenses cheaper, you get more of a reach. Now the downside to that is the APS-c sensor is not as good as a full frame. It don't work as good in low light. It may have the same amount of megapixels, but it won't be as high quality because of the sensor size. The sensor size determines a lot about the quality of your image, especially in low light. If you're in low light, full frame is the way to go. So what you need to do, and I'm going to show you guys what this looks like. I'm going to take some pictures with the cameras right beside each other and put the lenses on different ones and show you the exact difference toward the end of the video. But in low light, your full frame sensor is going to look much better. So you need to learn how far you can go with your ISO. Now, I have a Canon R6, which is full frame, and my Canon 6D is also a full frame, but there's a good many years between them, so there's some technology in there. So I know that I can turn my Canon R6 up to about 12,800 and have acceptable digital noise. Now back in the day it was called film grain, today it's called digital noise. And if I take the same full frame Canon 6D, I'm going to try to stop it around 6,400 just because it's a few generations older. So you need to know what each camera you have will do. Now this Canon 50D, I'll stop it around 800. Now I have a Canon 70D, I'll run it to about 1,600. So even though you may be getting that extra range with your lens, you're kind of limited to what you can do in lower light. Now, if it's middle of the day, you're going to be fine. And if you go to micro four thirds, like I've got a Lumix G9, I try to keep it below 1,000 or at least below 1,600 because I know in each one of these cameras, if I go above this ISO, I'm going to get too much digital noise that I don't like. Now, to throw another wrench in this deal, there's something called Topaz, and it's a program that you can use to kind of take some of the noise out of the picture. It works pretty good to an extent. I wouldn't go shoot crazy high and then come back and depend on Topaz to fix everything because it's only It's only a little bit of help. It's, you know, it'll help you out in a pinch. It's not something you need to just go, I forget the ISO, I'm just going to fix it all in Topaz later. Don't do that. That won't work out well in the long run. Topaz will get you out of a jam. It'll save a picture here or there, but it's not something you want to base your whole shoot on. So the first thing you need to know is how high can you go with the sensor on your particular camera. Now, if you're shooting Nikon or Fuji, your crop and you have an APS-c sensor on it, you're only going to have a 1-point times factor. Canon is the only one that's 1.6. It's just a slight difference in the size of the sensor. So I refer to 1.6 at APS-c because I shoot all Canon mostly. So do know that the others are 1.5. Very minimal difference, but a little bit. Something to remember. Now, you do have the advantages of smaller sensor, more reach with the same lens. But that also works in reverse if you're trying to go wide angle. Like if I take my Lumix G9, which is a micro four thirds camera, and it has a 2x crop factor, and I put a 24mm lens on there, suddenly it becomes a 48mm. So that's not hardly a wide angle at all. So I'll need to go down to about a 12mm to get it to be a 24mm through the camera because of the crop factors double. But again, if you're full frame and you have a 24mm, it is a 24mm, so you can shoot away. So then you've got the benefits of the wide and you've got the benefits of being able to shoot in lower light. You don't have to worry about the noise quite as bad. So there's always a bit of give and take. It's just like the exposure triangle. We're fixing to do a 3-part series on it. You've got your ISO, your f-stop, and your shutter speed. When you change one, another one has to be changed to keep it equal. Same idea. So first thing I want you to do is I want you to learn how high your ISO will go on your exact camera before you know, and I can't really go past that point or I'm going to get too much noise. So the way to do that is take a camera, go outside, maybe at sunset, and just start shooting 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. Those are your full stop settings for ISO. Take it on up to 25,000 if your camera will go that high and see what it looks like at every full stop. Now you will see in between, and you'll see from 100, you'll see 125 and so on, but the full stops are 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800, and so on. Those are your full stops. So learn that in your camera. Take your camera out tonight or tomorrow, right at sunset, and just shoot it at all the different ISOs to see what you can get out of your camera. This will be important because you'll know in the future, I can't go over ISO 8000 or whatever the case may be. I need to keep it below that to keep it looking good. Now the crop factor affects 3 things. It affects image quality, and we covered that. So the full frame sensor is going to have a better image quality than the APS-c or the micro four thirds just because it's a full frame sensor. Now you will pay more for it. There's always a price for that, so keep that in mind. That doesn't mean you can't get good image quality out of a micro four thirds. You can, but you've got more limits that you have to stay in and play around the rules. So you can't get as carried away on a micro four thirds as you can on a full frame because you don't have as much leeway. And I also covered the low light. Full frame dominates low light. APS-c will be second behind it, and micro four thirds will be pretty far behind it. I have to keep my micro four thirds a whole lot less on ISO than my full frame because the digital noise starts showing up in a hurry on micro four thirds. And then the third thing that it affects is the lens, the crop factor. So again, back to the 50mm. 50mm on full frame is 50mm. A 50mm on an APS-c Canon is 80mm. A 50mm on a micro four thirds is 100mm. So that's how it's going to affect the focal length on your lens based on your exact sensor size. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take camera outside. I'm going to take a 50mm and put it on full frame. Then I'm going to put it on APS-c, and then we'll do some shooting on a micro four thirds so you can see exactly how that does change crop factor on your lenses. So let's go take a look at that. Okay guys, I've got the camera set up. I'm going to be photographing my car, my very dirty car that needs a car wash really bad. It really is white and black, so we'll just have to go with that. I haven't had time to wash it. But I'm going to put a 50mm lens on the Canon R6, which is a full frame, which will give us a true 50mm view. Then I'm going to put a 50mm lens on the Canon 70D, which is the APS-c 1x6, which will give us an 80mm view, even though we're using a 50mm lens. And then I'm going to shoot with the micro four thirds. I've got a 25mm lens on here, which because of the 2x crop factor, it will shoot a 50mm view of a shot. And then I'm going to switch it all up, and I'm going to put an 85mm on the Canon R6, which will make it about a 126 on the Canon crop sensor. And then I've got a 42.5 lens, which you got it, it's half of 85. I'm going to put it on the Micro Four Thirds, and let's compare the pictures. And I'll show you the difference that the size of the sensor makes when you're putting a lens on the camera. It's huge, so let's watch. So first shot, we will go with the Canon R6. At 50mm right there, we got it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot the 70D with a 50mm lens on it on the front from the same angle. And it's going to be a lot more cropped in than the original shot was because of the crop factor being 1.6. So let's jump over to the Micro Four Thirds. I've got a 25mm on it, which will make it a 50mm shot. So let's try that one. So there we go. So now we have shot 50mm on a full frame Canon R6, 50mm on a Canon 70D crop sensor 1.6, and we shot a 25mm lens, which is the equivalent of a 50 on a Micro Four Thirds. So now let's jump over and change it to the 85mm lens. So as we change over to the 85, it's going to change it on the full frame, it'll be an 85, but when we get it over to the crop sensor, the R70, it's going to be about 126. So you'll see a huge difference in it. Just the crop sensor alone has made a serious change on here. I mean, just the 85 has made a huge difference. We're only getting part of the car now. So here's 85. And there's an 85mm shot on a full frame Canon. So now let's shoot it 85mm on a crop sensor camera. And this one's really getting tight. You're going to see a big difference on this one. I can't even get both of the wheels in the shot. All right, so now we're going to change the Micro Four Thirds lens over to a 42.5 lens. And yes, you don't see many 42.5, but it knows that it's going on a Micro Four Thirds lens, so it's going to be prepared to be an 85mm lens. So let's get this on here. All right, so this should be a standard 85 because the lens is a 42.5. There we go. Very good. Okay, so I took 6 pictures, 50mm on full frame, 50mm on crop sensor Canon, which made it an 80, and a 25mm on a Micro Four Thirds, which made it a 50, a 42.5 on a Micro Four Thirds, which made it an 85, an 85mm on a full frame Canon R6 is still an 85, but the 85mm on the Canon 70D, the 1.6 crop, makes it about a 126mm lens. So let's check out these pictures. So there you go, guys. You can definitely see the differences on the different sensors, and there's advantages and disadvantages all over the place. Depends on how you want to look at it. With your crop sensor and your Micro Four Thirds, you're getting more of a reach, but then you're trading low light quality if you end up in a low light situation. And the wide angle, if you're trying to go wide on a Micro Four Thirds, it's really hard. If you want to go wide on a full frame, it's much easier. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, on which camera you should go with. So if you have any questions about that, if you're looking into this and you're seeing that you're finding a problem with this and you don't quite understand it, feel free to leave a comment down at the bottom or my email. Either way, I'll respond back to you guys. Let me know. Hopefully this video helped you. If you didn't already understand what the different crop factors meant, hopefully it helped you out. If it did, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. You guys have a great day. Thanks. Hey guys, I just want to take this second of your time. If you guys would please hit like and subscribe, it would go a long ways toward helping our channel and help us keep making these videos. Thank you.